We're walking here. We're talking here. We're discussing Georgia football in New York this past weekend as the Bulldogs and Stetson Bennett were in the Heisman Trophy ceremony along with Kirby Smart, Todd Monken, and perhaps Georgia's next potential offensive coordinator. This is Connor in coverage. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Hello, everyone, and welcome into this week's episode of Connor in Coverage. My name is Connor Riley. We are fresh-ish back from New York. We were there, got there on Thursday, flew home early this morning, was there for Stetson Bennett's Heisman Trophy ceremony. Bennett came in fourth in this year's Heisman Trophy voting behind Caleb Williams, the winner from USC. Max Duggan came in second. CJ Stroud, who Bennett and the Georgia Bulldogs will play on December 31st. In the Peach Bowl, came in third. And tonight, we're just going to talk about what I had learned, what I had heard, some things I had picked up in my time in New York, talking with Stetson, getting to be around him for a good bit, getting to be around, Williams, CJ Stroud, Max Duggan there as well. So a lot of good stuff coming in. Then obviously we're going to take your questions. Busy time transfer portal, obviously. Ra Thomas, the wide receiver from Mississippi State, was visiting Georgia this weekend. You've got major recruiting news coming up. I saw Damon Wilson announce that he is going to make his decision on December 31st. You have Jordan Hall, a four-star defensive lineman, doing the same on December 22nd. That would be next Thursday, the week after this Thursday. So plenty of stuff to get into tonight, but we're going to start, obviously, the star of the weekend, Stetson Bennett, recapping everything that we had sort of heard and seen from him there. Stetson and getting to know him, he obviously wants to celebrate the team, put a lot on the team. Obviously he understands Georgia's team success is a big reason that he is here, but I also think it's important that for a guy like him, he gets this weekend to celebrate all that he has done in his career, because I don't think a lot of people, and you hear him touch on this a couple of times, and we're going to play some clips that we got from over the weekend. There are very few people on this earth that would go through what Bennett went through to get to where he has. And it speaks obviously to the ability that he has, but I think also the perseverance as well that sometimes so often gets overlooked. And one of the things I didn't even get a chance to ask him, but a guy that has been doubted as much as he has, and will still get doubted if he throws an interception in the Peach Bowl, there's going to be fans calling for Carson Beck to go out there. But for a guy to play with that much confidence and that much swagger that we've seen him do this year, for him to do all that, with all the doubt, and both externally coming from people and critics that he has to try to ignore, but also internally when, in the 2020 season, he said multiple times this past week, he just was not good enough that year. And that circumstance of getting benched for JT Daniels, I think, has helped him become the player we have seen him be this season, who is, in my opinion, a deserving Heisman Trophy finalist. I know there were a couple of national media members out there, Nicole Auerbach of The Athletic and Brandon Walker of Barstool Sports, who in particular were very vocal in that Stetson Bennett should not be there. I could not disagree more. Hendon Hooker had a nice story, but I think when you look at the totality of what Stetson Bennett has done, along with the fact that, the people that lose me the most are the ones, if you switch Stetson Bennett and Hendon Hooker's not putting up the same stats that he is in this Georgia offense. And I think there's a very real case that Stetson Bennett puts up better stats in Tennessee's offense. And I think we went through and counted this year, I think 12 different times Georgia has had a wide receiver tackled inside the 5. Now, Stetson Bennett has turned 4 of those into rushing touchdowns there. But, the numbers are what the numbers are. But look, the big game numbers, I think, as you heard Chris Fowler mention last night, are a big reason why Stetson was there. In 5 games against ranked opponents, 17 total touchdowns, 13 passing, 4 rushing, 2 interceptions, 73 completion percentage, 294 passing yards per game in those 5 contests. And most importantly, 5-0 in those games. And I'm going to play you a clip here, and it's sort of spliced together because I asked the question to these finalists on Saturday night about how important team success was in them getting there. And so Bennett goes into that, and then he sort of gets this last word in after Caleb Williams answers and talks about his time as a walk-on and how important that is. And I don't think that should be lost, given for so long it had seemed that Stetson Bennett was never going to shake that walk-on label, that even though he's been on scholarship since 2019, people were never going to let him forget that he was once a walk-on. And I actually think this is a really cool moment from Bennett, embracing the fact that he was a walk-on and how that helped him get to a Heisman ceremony, the first Georgia quarterback to ever be a finalist for this award. Now, granted, they didn't start inviting finalists until 1982, but the fact that he is here over guys like, say, Jake Fromm, Aaron Murray, Matthew Stafford, guys who were perceived to be more talented quarterbacks than him, I think says a lot about the Stetson Bennett story. So here's Stetson Bennett talking about the importance of winning and how that got him there, and along with the end, the importance of his walk-on route to getting to the Heisman ceremony.
Yeah, I mean, I love each and every one of our teammates, you know, I mean, and I think I tell them all the time, I'm just a fan. I just like watching them play football. You know, you watch Devon Bullard run around, you know, like Mighty Mouse, having 5 sacks against Tennessee, Jalen Carter being Superman, you know, and then obviously our offensive line is unbelievable. I think I got sacked 7 times this year, and wideouts and the backs who, you know, do freaky things whenever they get the ball in their hands. For me, I think the game's, you know, I think it's easy for me because all I got to do is get the ball in their hands and then let them go play football, right? So as long as I can do that, then we'll be okay. So as a walk-on, you know, I think we have the best scout team in America on offense and defense, and they play so hard every single week. You know, it's their games. That's how I used to view it. It's their games during the week, and I don't think we'd be the team to work without them. So.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. What I'm going to ask you to do is please stand up. Just stand over here.
So yeah, cool stuff there from Stetson talking about his teammates. We're going to play a little bit more about, you know, him talking about some of his offensive guys here as well in just a minute. But I thought that walk-on part was really important for, I think, you guys to hear, just because that is so important to his journey. And I think it shows a real acceptance of and maturity in Stetson, and looking back on that and how that has gotten him here. And I think that was a really cool moment for him and for this Georgia program as well. You know, Lincoln Riley has sent now 4 quarterbacks in his 6 years as a head coach to New York. There were some media members joking about him getting a condo in New York, given it seems like he's up here every year. And Caleb Williams, in my opinion, was a deserving winner and is a very talented player, one that Georgia recruited, one that ironically Stetson Bennett hosted as a recruit back in 2019 for the Notre Dame game when Williams came down to visit. So a little bit of connected history there that those 2 Heisman finalists had. But I think, you know, this was Georgia's first time there. And, you know, it's not, I don't believe, going to be their last time there. I'm going to have a story on Monday looking ahead to, you know, guys who could possibly be here from 2023. It's really essentially just whoever you think is going to be the quarterback next year, which I could very well see Carson Beck, you know, if this offense goes the way that I think it's going to go next year, could certainly see that being the case. Defensively, you wonder, you know, who's going to be the guy that puts up big numbers. Is it maybe like a Shmuel Munden or a Jamon Dumas-Johnson potentially? Because I don't know if they're going to have the edge rusher per se that'll get the sack numbers, and there isn't, in my opinion, right now a defensive lineman that is going to make the kind of impact that, say, Jalen Carter has over the last 6 games here. Maybe Michael Williams really explodes going into next year, but that'd be really something if that were the case. And you just see it's really, really hard for defensive players to win this award. It has not happened since Charles Woodson technically won it back in 1997. He was contributing on punt and a little bit as a wide receiver there as well. So I mentioned earlier Stetson talking about his teammates getting him here and how that has helped him. Gave some interesting comments on A.D. Mitchell that we're going to play for you, as well as a pretty great line on Ladd McConkey, who I think is quietly, maybe not so quietly if you're a Georgia fan, becoming one of the better receivers in college football. I mean, this guy just week in, week out continues to make big plays, and the expectation is the Bulldogs will have him for the college football playoff game against Ohio State. This is a guy who's been banged up and dealing with a knee issue for much of the season now, and he's going out there and just besting guys time and time again. So I thought Stetson here again talking about his teammates, but really giving some great insight on both Ladd McConkey and A.D. Mitchell, 2 guys who are going to be very important players for Georgia's college football playoff game against Ohio State on December 31st.
There has been more asked of me this year, which has been fun for me, and I've enjoyed it a lot. But I think that comes from me earning it, me being good enough to do that, right? I don't think I necessarily was last year. Some spots, but not all the time. And I think that also goes to show just how much work like our entire offensive team put in this offseason, as well as Monk and the other position coaches. But mainly, you look how much better Darnell is at running routes and going. He plays every play. And our offensive line, I've gotten sacked 7 times. Obviously Brock, but Ladd coming in. When has a dude that looks like me caught for that many touchdowns in an SEC? Dude. And if he would stay up, he'd have a few more. But dude's incredible. And we all love football, and we're all. Monk's helping us, and the coaches are doing such a good job of helping us understand ball, so now we can play together as another thing. Well, we're not. Me and Five got to get back. We got to get back to being us, and so that starts whenever I get back on Monday. And so that's what we're worried about practice, not really health yet. We'll get to that later.
Yeah, so apologize there for the lighting on that second sort of Stetson video. It was not the best setup in the world there for Mr. Bennett, but some interesting comments there about A.D. Mitchell, about getting him re-involved in the Georgia offense. And you hear Stetson talk about it, and this is not something new for this Georgia team. Obviously, they were in the playoff last year, but you think back to those bye week practices where they're not necessarily just focusing right on Florida because of their next opponent. They're focusing on Georgia as well as doing some self-scouting and obviously taking a larger view on Ohio State. But they won't start really diving in head first into Ohio State until they get closer to the game. They know they have some things to work on, some things to clean up, obviously, in the secondary there as well. I think that is something to be focused on. So I definitely think that Mitchell, how he progresses here, I think is going to be another encouraging sign for this Georgia offense, given you've got a Mackey Award winner in Brock Bowers. You hear what Bennett had to say about both Darnell Washington and Ladd McConkey there. I think Kendall Milton is a guy who has really come on these last couple of games since sort of coming back from his groin/quad injury he suffered early in the year. Kenny McIntosh had an awesome month of November, along with a big start to the beginning of the season. And I think the time off for Georgia in between, the SEC championship game and the college football playoff game against Ohio State is going to be really big for him. Having him be healthy will be important. Now, Ohio State, they're expected to get back Myron Williams and Travion Henderson. They're 2 starting running backs who are very talented players. And so that knife cuts both ways there. But I think if you're Georgia, with what you've seen from both Milton and McIntosh of late, along with Bennett in that passing game, I think you really have to like where this offense is headed going into the college football playoff, considering they scored 50 points on LSU, and they very easily could have scored, in my opinion, 70 with how they were executing. And that's not a terrible defense we have seen from LSU over the course of the season, though they did look pretty bad against an anemic Texas A&M team. And then one last little bit here that I had really picked up, and the timing of this is not, I think, coincidental, given on Friday you start hearing Todd Monken's name being mentioned as a possible candidate there for Purdue. He is from the state of Illinois. It is a Power 5 job right now. It is the only Power 5 job open in college football after Stanford hired, I believe, Troy Taylor, the Sacramento State head coach. And I do see a world where Purdue would hire him. He fits a lot of the qualifications that past successful Purdue coaches, you think Jeff Brom, Joe Tiller, strong coaches they've had their offensive backgrounds in being able to make it work. But there are also cons of that Purdue job. That job is going to get a lot tougher when USC and potentially UCLA join that league. And you have the Big Ten doing away with divisions. That's going to make things very tough for a school like Purdue. So I do think that is something to weigh. And again, Todd Monken has it awesome at Georgia. He gets to call plays. He is the highest paid coordinator in the sport right now, and has a very, it has shown that he's been incredible at the job. As a Broyles Award finalist this year. I think at some point, if he keeps doing what he is, he's ultimately going to win that award, which goes to the nation's top assistant coach. But I think a name to really know here, and Stetson talked about him both at his Burlsworth Trophy, which you can find on our Dog Nation YouTube page. I would highly recommend you go watch that. That was a really cool speech that I think Bennett maybe let people inside more than he ever has, and Kirby's Visor brings it up right now. We're talking here about Buster Faulkner, a guy who, you'll hear Stetson from him in a minute, but a guy who really acts as the go-between between Todd Monken and Stetson Bennett. And So I think Faulkner is a guy who, if Monken does move on and becomes a head coach somewhere else, and that's the only job that he is leaving for, he is leaving to be a head coach somewhere. He's not leaving, I believe, to go be an NFL offensive coordinator. I think he wants to be a college head coach. I would feel very comfortable saying that I think Faulkner would be a guy that would be highly considered to be Georgia's next offensive coordinator, given he's been in the system for 3 years. He's a guy that Georgia clearly made an investment in getting him from being Southern Miss's sitting offensive coordinator to taking a quality control role here at Georgia. And when you hear Stetson Bennett speak about him, you really understand why he is liked so much. I would also note, while yes, Georgia didn't win the Arch Manning recruitment, Buster Faulkner played a very big role in that recruitment as well, and Georgia doing as well as it did when it came to Arch Manning making his, considering his schools, and ultimately he picks Texas. But Buster Faulkner, I think, would actually be an improvement over Todd Monken in terms of recruiting and the ability to go out and get players there. But here is Stetson Bennett talking about Buster Faulkner, a very, very important person in the Georgian coaching ranks.
I think he's been extremely important. He's the one, he runs us through the drills and, just talk ball. But I think probably the main thing that he's helped at is just on the sideline. Like, he is the mediator between me and Monk. Me and Monk don't really talk during the games, which I think is probably a good thing. Just because we're both so, I don't know, whatever you want to call us.
Passionate.
Yeah. And, but so Buster listens to what Monk says and filters it out. Obviously, doesn't tell me everything, because I don't, people say stuff in the heat of the moment, and Monk's going to say stuff. And I don't need to hear all that, every time, just because nature, he doesn't need to hear everything I have to say. Right? It's just not important. So he does. Buster keeps me sane, keeps me in the moment, keeps me, helps me out. What are you seeing here with this play? And all that stuff. His presence is comforting, and he's damn good.
So, yeah, you hear Stetson Bennett talk there about Buster Faulkner, and I see people, commenting about Mike Bobo. I think it was Jay Shipes who referenced, him saying that Bobo was calling plays. That's not what Todd Monken said in his speech at the Broyles Award. You can go find that on our Dog Nation YouTube page there as well. He was talking about play design there, and he gave Bobo some credit for the play design. He also gave play design credit to Ryan Williams, an assistant there on the Georgia staff as well. And so while I think Todd Monken is largely speaking about it being a collaborative effort, yes, that is correct. Monken is the guy ultimately steering the ship, and Faulkner, Bobo, Ryan Williams, they all play significant roles in the development of this offense. Del McGee, Brian McClendon, Stacey Searles do as well. And so I think with all that, it is truly a village raising this Georgia offense. But Buster Faulkner, I think coming out of this week in his name, Georgia fans need to pay a lot more attention to. So with that, touching a little bit, and I'll have a story sort of, rounding more up along with, I've had, I think, 8 or 9, maybe 10 stories at this point coming out of the weekend. Just things I learned, stories, Stet Quavius, how that came to be and why he's probably done getting the fade. But, bunch of good stories out there from Dog Nation. Make sure to check it out. Without further ado, let's open it up to your comments and questions, things you guys might want to talk about here tonight on Connor and Coverage. We'll go probably about another 10 minutes or so. It's been a long weekend, no games for the first time, but we shall see there. Chris Slim, we'll go right here off the bat. Do you see Tony Grimes coming to UGA? I was asked this weekend. I kind of don't. Obviously, if Georgia feels the need to go get a corner out of the portal, they will. But you look at where this team is with cornerback next year, right? They're already bringing in A.J. Harris. They're trying to make a hard push to land Daniel Harris in the 2023 recruiting class, and they have a commitment from Chris Peel there as well. And in the previous recruiting cycle, they bring in Julian Humphrey, they bring in Jaheim Singletary, and they bring in Dalen Everett. Kamari Lassiter will be coming back. Nyland Green, we'll see what happens with him. I think there's a good chance he comes back next year as well and is a talented player based off what you've seen on special teams. I think Keely Ringo is going to be an NFL draft pick, a first rounder in all likelihood. But I just don't see Tony Grimes coming in here and stepping in right away and being a starter. I don't think that they would take him over, say, Dalen Everett being the starting corner. I think next year when Georgia opens the season against, I think it's Ball State. No, they play Ball State week 2. Whoever they open the season against on September 2nd next year, I don't think Tony Grimes is going to be on this team. I do think that if you're looking at the portal, the positions to really look at here are a wide receiver, which you've already seen. They've offered a wide receiver from Kent State, Dante Cephas, I believe. Ra Thomas, the Mississippi State wide receiver, he was in town this weekend. He is going to be staying within the SEC, it seems like, and it seems like Georgia is making a very big push to go out and get him. So wide receiver is certainly a position to watch there. I think safety, if they can go out and find a guy that can come in and contribute right away there, I definitely think that is a position to watch in the transfer portal. And then edge rusher there as well. But I think we're going to get some more answers on this edge rusher position for Georgia in the coming weeks because they have Gabe Harris and Samuel Mpemba committed in the class right now for the 2023 recruiting cycle. And then you also have Damon Wilson, who is set to announce his decision on December 21st. And you bring those three guys in, that should go a long way in replacing what you have in Nolan Smith and Robert Beal, not to mention you have a guy like Marvin Jones Jr., who I think is going to have a potentially very big next year, provided that he has a chance to get fully healthy in the offseason, because I can tell you guys right now, obviously he missed the SEC championship game, but he has been dealing with injuries and has been pretty banged up for most of this season. And so I think him getting his body right this offseason is going to go a long way determining how big of a role Marvin Jones plays in this team next year, and also how much Georgia might be willing to look at that edge rusher position. But to answer the original question, I don't see Tony Grimes coming here. And I know Georgia recruited him in the 2020, I guess technically 2021 cycle, though he reclassified, 5-star cornerback, talented guy. His career has not gone the way he has thought it has. That's why I think he's transferring from North Carolina. I also found it interesting. Storm Duck, the other really talented North Carolina cornerback, he is also in the transfer portal as well there. You've heard Kirby Smart talk about the transfer portal before. Yes, Tony Grimes, I think, probably could fit in here based on what Georgia knows from him as a recruit. But with what Georgia already has in the cornerback room, I don't see Tony Grimes as talented as he is coming in and beating out and really running the risk of upsetting the chemistry on this Georgia team and going out and bringing in a guy like that in. Let's see. Comments, questions. James Hightower, I do. Now, Ladd gets healthy next year. A.D. Mitchell takes another step forward. You probably feel a little bit better there. You think Marcus Rosemy-Jackson, I really liked what I've seen out of him this season. He's become a real weapon. I think Dylan Bell has shown some nice flashes as a freshman here. But I think if you can go out there and get another proven contributor for this wide receiver room next year, I think you absolutely do it. We'll see what this tight end room looks like. Obviously, Brock Bowers is still going to be Brock Bowers, and I know people will expect a lot out of Oscar Delp, but replacing Darnell Washington is not going to be an easy job, just given all that he brings to this offense. And so I do think that is a factor there. And so if you can get another talented player in a wide receiver who has SEC level experience, like say Ra Thomas, or high level experience, and is able to potentially be a fit on this team, I think that's something you absolutely consider. Scott Boland, so far we only know of one player in the transfer portal. That'll be defensive lineman Bill Norton. It'll be interesting to see if anyone else enters the transfer portal. I would take it that given that Norton is the only one to do so far, he will not be participating with the team in the college football playoff, but we shall see what ultimately happens there the next time we get to talk to Kirby and ask him about that there as well. But so far, Bill Norton is the only Georgia player that has entered the transfer portal. Let's see. Comments, thoughts, questions. D-Bone, you mentioned Arik Gilbert. I don't know what you've seen out of Arik Gilbert this year that would give you the confidence in what he'd be able to bring to the team next year. He was not with the team at the SEC championship game. Ultimately, I think the writing is pretty clear on the wall with Gilbert. Brock Bowers is going to have to carry a heavy load, and they're going to need Oscar Delp, I think, to take some more positive steps forward. They like what they've seen out of him so far as a freshman, but obviously the role Darnell Washington plays is pretty significant, and it would be a big step up. It's also, I think, very telling right now when you look at the recruiting, and Jeff Sintel on Before the Hedges has had you guys covered here. They've got Pierce Sperlin and Lawson Lucky already committed, and those guys will sign. They're still making recruiting pushes to Deuce Robinson and Walker Lyons out there on the West Coast to try and add a third tight end. So that should tell you sort of what they feel and what they think about this tight end room and what it looks like going forward for these guys. Mark Thornton, first, yes, Octavius Oliver. I do think Darnell Washington will be in the NFL next year. That will not surprise me there. Mark Thornton, what are our biggest challenges in facing Ohio State? Their wide receivers are really talented, even without Jackson Smith and Jigba, who is off to the NFL as he tries to deal with a hamstring injury that has bothered him all year long. Marvin Harrison Jr. might be the most talented wide receiver in the country. Emeka Egbuka is a 1,000-yard receiver. When you have a guy like Julian Fleming, who was the number one wide receiver in the 2020 recruiting class, as your number 3 receiver, you've clearly got a lot of talent in that room there. And look, we saw Georgia give up 500 passing yards against LSU. Now, part of that, I think, was just the way the game had played out there. I think, like you saw them do against Tennessee, I think the secondary can definitely buck up when they need to against talented competition. Jalen Hyatt did win the Biletnikoff Award that goes to the nation's top wide receiver. So I definitely think the key there, it's not so much necessarily going to be, how do those guys hold up in coverage, but how well does Georgia pressure CJ Stroud? Because I think we've seen enough from Stroud at this point that if you give him time, he is capable of picking you apart. But under pressure, he is not great. And if Jalen Carter is able to do what he did to Jaden Daniels, I think that's going to go a long way in slowing down Ohio State's powerful offense. Defensively, I think this group is susceptible in the back end and in the secondary, and you can see Georgia go out there and hit some big plays like Michigan did in that game a few weeks ago there. They've got some talented players there in the front. JT Tuamoa is a very talented defensive lineman. Zach Harrison is a guy who's going to be in the NFL next year as a defensive end. They have talent there in that defensive front, but the secondary I don't think holds up very well against Georgia, and so I would expect Stetson Bennett to have a big game there. Let's see. I've seen a couple comments here about Carson Beck within the context of this show. I do think right now he is the favorite to be the starting quarterback for Georgia next year. I've been impressed with what I have seen from him in mop-up time duty, and I think it's telling as well that Georgia has really tried to get him more reps in those situations. Obviously, he did have the turnover against Georgia Tech, but I think you look back to what he did against Vanderbilt, and it's hard not to be impressed with the arm talent we saw on display there from him. And so I think going forward, Beck's going to be the guy. He's got experience in this offense. He's been in it for 3. It'll be 4 years now. Next year, if Todd Monken is the offensive coordinator, which is still very much on the table, that's only going to help him. I think he's a guy that a lot of teammates like and are eager to see him take that next step. But Brock Vandagriff and Gunnar Stockton are not going to make that easy on him. I expect that to be a very intense competition in spring practice. And coming out of that, we'll probably have a better idea in terms of where this quarterback room is shaking and looking right now. But as it stands right now on December 11th, I think Carson Beck is going to be your game 1 starter next season. And I think this Georgia team likes a lot what they have in Beck going forward. Andrew Hughes, do I think Georgia has a night game next year? You look at their schedule, it's worse next year than it was this year. And obviously, I think when Georgia and Tennessee play, those teams will be ranked. I think when Georgia and Ole Miss play, those teams will be ranked. Now, I'd have to check out what the other SEC games are that weekend, but I think there's a chance that is either a night game or a 3:30 game. It's also worth mentioning next year is the last year of the CBS television deal, to where that game will be the 3:30 game, and that'll be the sort of big SEC game of the week. And starting in 2024, ironically, also the same year the college football playoff starts, the new SEC television contract sets in with ESPN. And so there they will have more flexibility to put the bigger game in prime time. I think this is what you're going to see happen there. And so that ultimately, I think, will allow Georgia, a marquee program, to play in more night games, because they played in Florida, Kentucky, Tennessee was a 3:30 game. Auburn was a 3:30 game on CBS. So that was obviously a doubleheader leading into Alabama A&M. They played 4 times on CBS this year. 3 of those were the big SEC game of the week. You think going forward, if those games are on ESPN, when they're on ESPN, those are potentially going to be night games there as well. Kirby's Belt, something to monitor. Mike Leach was rushed to the hospital today. The Mississippi State head coach had a medical emergency. Zach Arnett is taking over as the interim there. Definitely something to monitor and watch and keep in your thoughts, as scary situation they're developing at Mississippi State as Mike Leach has a medical emergency there. Let's see. We'll maybe do 1 or 2 more questions. Let's see. Yeah, D-Bone, this is a good point. Georgia's schedule next year is, I think, from the outside right now, even weaker, and that Tennessee game is going to loom even larger, especially because it's the last SEC game of the season there. And if Tennessee does what they did this year, there's a chance that game decides who goes to Atlanta, and that'll be in Rocky Top. It'll be a raucous environment, though. While yes, what they did against Alabama this year should be taken into account. Hendon Hooker will not be back there. Joe Milton is certainly a capable player, and whoever steps into that Josh Heupel offense is going to put up big numbers. But Jalen Hyatt's going to be gone, and Cedric Tillman is likely going to be gone. There's some turnover there in that offense that is going to be interesting to see how they go about replacing. So, Marla Carr, good to see you from Broken Arrow. You know what? Wade Walford, this would be a good one. We touched on this earlier. He is the healthiest that he has been in quite some time, and I would expect him to be as close to full go in that college football playoff game against Ohio State on December 31st. He played, I think, 15, 20 snaps in the game against LSU, didn't have any targets, but I think he is going to be as close to what we have seen from AD being healthy since really that Oregon game to open the season. And I'll be interested to see how much he is targeted in that game. Because obviously Ladd has developed into a very trustworthy receiver and a big play guy. Brock Bowers is the best tight end in the country. Darnell is a guy who has been able to rip off chunk plays there. But AD brings something on the outside that Georgia doesn't have anywhere else on this roster. And so if he's able to stretch the field with his twitchiness and length, I think that adds another dynamic layer to this offense. And so that'll be interesting and certainly something we'll follow up on as we get closer to the college football playoff here. But that'll do it for us here tonight. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I hope I illuminated you a little bit on what we came away from New York from this weekend. It was obviously a very big weekend for Stetson Bennett, really a big weekend for the Georgia program. Kirby Smart's first Heisman finalist. I think it's pretty neat that it is a guy like Stetson Bennett who's been through so much in his time here at Georgia. For him to get to this point, for him to get the individual recognition I think he hasn't always gotten but so richly deserves, I think was a very cool moment for him. Comes in fourth place in the Heisman Trophy voting. Caleb Williams finishes in first, but that's behind us now. We're going to start slowly moving ahead. We've got National Signing Day coming up a week from Wednesday, or early signing period, rather. You've got the college football playoff getting closer and closer. Coaching news, transfer portal stuff is still going to obviously impact this week. What happens with the Purdue job in regards to Todd Monken? Do any more Georgia players enter the transfer portal? Does Georgia land anyone out of the transfer portal? We've already seen a school like Michigan land a player. One quick note, because I've had this question asked to me a bunch. Hey, if a player transfers in through the transfer portal, can they play in the bowl game? Guys, this is still college athletics. They still have to be enrolled at a school to be a member of that team. You can't enroll in a school in December and be active and play for that team. So if anyone does, say Rod Thomas, sign with Georgia and commit to the program, he's not playing in the college football playoff game against Ohio State. And that's not just true for Georgia. That's true for other schools out there. I've seen that question a lot and have been kind of mystified by it. But that is sort of where things stand with the transfer portal. If Georgia lands a player, the earliest you will see them in Sanford Stadium will be September 2nd next year, unless they are playing at G-Day, which will probably be in April. But transfer portal is busy. Coaching news is busy. I've been busy weekend in New York with Stetson Bennett. But great coverage, great talking to you guys. Mike Griffith on the beat tomorrow. Brandon Adams live back in the studio. He got to enjoy his cruise this weekend. Now I saw on Friday he stepped in to talk about Stetson sort of Heisman backlash. You've got Jeff Sintel on Wednesday, which is going to be a huge show leading into the early signing period. We've got tons of stuff for you guys coming up in these next couple of weeks. So thank you guys so much for tuning in. My name is Connor Riley. This has been Connor in Coverage. We'll see you guys here next Sunday.